Good morning and welcome to our April edition of the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility webinars. This one is Filling in the Gaps, How Micromobility Can Help Enrich Transportation Options. I'm your host, Elliott McFadden, the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Coordinator at MnDOT. These webinars are a program of our Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Program, which is seeking to increase familiarity with different kinds of shared mobility technologies and services, as well as a platform for us to share with each other innovative and interesting projects that are happening around Minnesota and around the United States. Webinars generally are on the third Wednesday of the month. We've moved this one up one day to make room for our spring training for our public transit agencies, but normally on the third Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. We are not going to have a webinar in May because that same week is going to be the Minnesota Transportation Conference, and so that gives opportunity for folks who are attending that to not have a conflict. So next webinar will be in June, and if you were invited to this webinar, you should get an invite when we post the subject for that. And if there are any folks that are on staff or people in your community that you think that these webinars would be of interest to, please go ahead and email me at elliott.mcfadden@state.mn.us, and I will be happy to add those folks. Also, if you miss any of the webinar today, they will be recorded and posted on our transit website on the MnDOT webpage. Today we're going to be talking about micromobility, and before I introduce our first speaker, wanted to give you a short history of shared mobility. It's near and dear to my heart. Before joining MnDOT, I was the CEO of the bike share system in Austin, Texas, and co-founder of the North American Bike Share Association. So I come with some background having worked in this as part of the shared mobility industry. And just to give you a sense of what has happened before and where the industry is going, I wanted to give you a quick little primer. So bike sharing actually goes back to the 1960s. There was the first generation was a program that started in the Netherlands called white bikes, and they essentially were bikes that were painted white and just left sprinkled throughout the community, not locked up to anything. Just anybody could pick up a bike and ride it wherever they needed to. When they were done, they just put it back out on the street and let somebody else grab it. That went about as well as you would expect long term. Bikes would go out and they would eventually disappear, and it wasn't really a sustainable model. The second generation of bike share happened in Copenhagen in the 80s and 90s. They developed a program that was kind of akin to when you check out a cart at the airport, you put a coin in as a deposit. When you return the cart, you get that coin back. Same kind of thing with their bike share program. This was targeted mostly at tourists and didn't have a lot of potential for growth beyond that particular setting. The third, which I think people are going to be more familiar with, is the first large-scale software-driven system with stations called Velib, which was in Paris in 2007 they launched. And this led to a growth of bike share systems in North America that were for the most part, partnerships between cities, transit agencies, and other kinds of public entities and private providers. Nice Ride in the Twin Cities was one of the first in 2010. That was a station-based system, and one of the disadvantages of this system is it's very capital intensive. So usually had to get large grants to be able to put these things on the ground. Each station could cost between $40,000 and $100,000, depending on how big the station was and how many bikes you had. And the programs themselves were driven mostly with sponsorships and grants. There was also, as I mentioned, high capital cost for growth. So, once you got that initial grant, it was hard to go back out and get more money to serve more parts of the community. And these stations also took up a big amount of space in the street, so there was also potential conflict for use of space. In the mid 2010s, we saw a new technology emerged, dockless bikes that came out of China as mobile technology improved. These were bikes that had locks built in on them. They could be put out really anywhere. Much less expensive to deploy, and we saw a lot more private investment coming in to drive growth. As in China and much of the rest of the world, this led to an oversaturation because of the low barrier to get into the market. And so we saw bikes systems pop up all over the country with hundreds, sometimes thousands of bikes, but unfortunately not very good ridership. There was sort of willy-nilly where bikes were put down. And you saw a lot of street clutter happening with this. Also, we then had scooters appear a couple years later, around 2017. And these had a similar model to that fourth generation of bike share in that they weren't attached to a station or docked anywhere, but they had a much higher ridership than bikes. And so there was much more potential for growth there. We had some of the same growing pains, oversaturation, scooters getting dropped into communities without much regulatory insight. Early on, there were issues with shorter lifespan of the vehicles. These were basically consumer vehicles that were thrown out onto the street and high operational costs. And now what we're seeing as a fifth generation is a hybrid in better equipment that is designed to withstand the elements, both in bikes and in scooters, and things that can be docked and locked in different ways. We're still trying to figure out what the business model is going to be long term, whether that's going to be private, public-private partnership, or publicly funded. You know, I think because of that, we may see smaller communities struggle to attract operators long term. And so I think we need to be looking at all kinds of different models, which is why we've brought our guests here today. And so I'm going to drop out of this now and invite our first speaker, Waffiyyah Murray. She is the Indego Bike Share Program Manager at the City of Philadelphia. Is going to tell us a little bit about their program and what they've done to engage their community to grow their bike share program. Take it away, Waffiyyah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Waffiyyah Murray. As mentioned, I am the Indego Program Manager for the City of Philadelphia's Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, OTIS for short. And thank you, Elliott, for giving that, brief history of bike share and share micromobility. We've done so much that you often forget how new bike share still is because it's grown so much in the last 10 to 12 years. So it was good to be able to look back. So just a bit of history about our bike share system in the city of Philadelphia. So we have a dock-based system, which means you check a bike in and out at stations throughout the city. The system is owned by the city of Philadelphia. We have a concessionaire contract with our system operator, Bicycle Transit, who operates and manages the system. And our lead sponsor is Independence Blue Cross and Blue Shield. We launched in April of 2015. We started with 60 stations, and 600 bikes. And now we have 160 stations and 1,600 bikes, which are a mix of both classic and electric pedal assist. And we reach more than 5 million rides so far, and we have over 10,000 active Indego pass holders. City of Philadelphia is a founding member of the Better Bike Share Partnership, BBSP for short, which is a national initiative focused on equity and access and shared micromobility as a whole. So the members include the City of Philadelphia, People for Bikes, and NACTO. And so we work together collectively to identify barriers to the use of bike share and shared micromobility for underserved communities of color, people with low income, and we help to figure out ways to alleviate those barriers so that everyone has equitable access to bike share. So just talking a bit more about our work in Philadelphia. So we knew that before we launched our bike share system that we had to really incorporate equity from the forefront. The city of Philadelphia is very diverse. It's a mixture of race and culture and ages and everything. And so we knew if we wanted a bike share system that was really going to be successful, it had to incorporate equity. And so that is not often an easy task, especially in terms of transportation. There is a history of, transportation projects not really having a equity lens, a history of communities being planned for as opposed to being planned with, people, just having projects show up in their neighborhood that they weren't told about, didn't ask their input, weren't fans of. And so there was a lot of, mistrust and a lot that we had to really work through before we got started. But the first step in that for us was to acknowledge the history of transportation inequities and the history of just inequities within the world, especially in our underserved communities that really do not receive the resources and support that they need. And knowing that, a lot of their frustration or a lot of their reservations about, bike share or transportation in general really come from a honest place. And so acknowledging that history, acknowledging the past wrongs that some, transportation projects have taken and really work to help, start a new path forward. And so the first step beyond acknowledging the history was really to start building that relationship and trust. Building that trust and that, the community can trust us when we say we really want to implement a bike share system that is for them, for the community. And then really working to build up that relationship. So a lot of that came with, getting to know the community, getting to know who the players are, who's in the community, who you are, what are you interested in. It was also important for us to have a co-creation and a co-development process, meaning that you need to have diverse voices at the table when you're planning and implementing programs and initiatives. If you have, a group full of people that all have the same lived experiences, the same ideas, then you're going to come up with the same thing. You need to have, diversity in age, race, culture, ethnicity, so that you're able to come up with ideas that meet the needs of the different diversity of your ridership. It's always important to have a diverse co-creation and co-development process where we, the city, worked with our community members and our community partners to find out, what do you think about bike share? What are some of your barriers? What are some of the programs that we can implement to help you use the bike share system and feel like it's for you, and then actively work with those community members to implement the ideas that we heard. So identifying community needs. That was a big one. A lot of times we would go to communities and, want to talk about bike share, but understanding that often bike share is not at top of mind for a lot of communities. Some of them are dealing with things like lack of resources, as I mentioned. Some of them are in food deserts, or resource deserts overall. They're dealing with health disparities within the community, lack of employment, other things. And so it's important to really talk with the communities that you're looking to serve, identify what their needs are, and see if any way bike share or shared micromobility can be a way to help support or alleviate some of the other needs or concerns that the community may have. For instance, if you're dealing with health disparities in your community, bike share can be a great way to, be physically active. It's also a great way to support mental health. If you're dealing with, lack of access to jobs or educational resources or, just basic needs, bike share can be an affordable, healthy way to get back and forth to resources in your community. So seeing how, bike share and shared micromobility can help support some of the other needs as opposed to adding something additional to people's plates, and really getting that feedback. So attending community events, meeting people within their community, not having to have people come down to your offices downtown at 2:00 in the afternoon when that time or location doesn't really work for them. So finding out when's the best time to meet, where are the events, who are the people we need to be talking to. Take the time to identify those folks, identify those spaces, and go there and get the feedback that you need. And it also helps show that you're invested in learning about the community. I mentioned earlier the importance of implementing the feedback that you receive. So, doing community engagement is great, but if you're not implementing, what you've heard, then it's pointless. And it's also something that, community members remember that, if you implemented what they said or not. So, when we heard feedback about where people want stations, we work to try to accommodate that as much as possible. Because when we talk about equity and access is a key piece of that. You can't expect people to want to use the system if they don't have actual access to it. If they have to take a plane, train, a boat just to get to your bike share system. So it was important for us when we rolled out our system to not just have bikes in downtown center city, at universities or things like that. We had to make sure that we actually had stations in neighborhoods where community members could pick up a bike a few blocks away and then get to the different resources and assets that they needed. And we continue to expand and build out our network so that we can reach as many people throughout the city as possible. Another barrier that we heard when reaching out to folks was, financial barrier. We needed to make sure that our system was affordable. So for us, that meant having, different levels of payment options. So we have, the regular or the standard pass, which is currently $17 a month, or $156 a year. But we also have a access pass program. So anyone with a PA access card, which is a benefits card that you get from the state to help, for folks that are on public assistance, we have an access pass. So if you have an access card, you're able to get a discounted membership for $5 a month or $48 a year. So yeah, it was important for us to, implement those different levels of payment, because as I mentioned, that was something that we heard affordability was important. And so, making sure that you take that feedback and then implement it. And as I remember, community members really remember, because when we started to put stations out, like we started having conversations with folks, back in like 2014 before the system even launched. And so, a year or two later, when we actually were able to install stations in a lot of those neighborhoods, we would have people come and say, oh yeah, I remember you were here, a few years ago talking about putting the station here. And we see you actually showed up and did it. Like, yeah, we did what we said we were going to do. And so that also goes into that building trust, hearing what people have said, actually showing up and doing what you said you're going to do. So that's part of also how you build that relationship and trust. Something else we also heard that was important for people was, the education and encouragement just to be able to ride. Some people either hadn't ridden a bike in a very long time, hadn't ridden a bike since they were a kid, or were not used to riding a bike in the city or the urban environment. And so for that, we implemented free education and encouragement classes and programs. So we host free monthly group rides, as well as, just free group rides with community partners throughout the year to show them how they can use bike share, how they can do so safely, and also, how to plan out your route to be able to get to the different resources that you have. And also just a way to explore your community in a new way. Oftentimes there are great resources or locations, parks, green spaces within neighborhoods that people don't know about. And to be able to lead a group ride to show people, these gems and diamonds within their own neighborhood that they may not have paid much attention to is really an eye-opening experience. And to be able to do that on a bike, it's also a different experience. We also host free bike safety education classes. So we offer learn to ride classes, sit down bike safety class to teach people about, the rules of the road, the laws as a cyclist, which a lot of people don't know. There are laws for being a cyclist and you do have rights. So teaching people their rights, as I mentioned earlier, teaching people how to plan out their route, how to be safe, wearing helmets. We provide helmets and other things as well to help support people on that ride, but really having an outlet for people to come and also try out the bike before they commit to a membership, and also try it out in a safe environment with professionals. So we contract our local bicycle advocacy organization, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, and they lead our rides and classes portion. Also, something that we heard is being able to support programming for all ages. So though our bike share system, the age requirement is 14 and up, which is where most of our programming is supported for 14 and up. But we also, provide some other bike safety education for our younger youth, if they're able to provide their own bike, or we're able to, work with the local organization to have us rent some youth bikes for an event so that we can teach them about biking, because at the end of the day they are the future cyclists of tomorrow, and so we want to make sure that we're providing educational opportunities for them as well. We also have some education support for teenagers and high schoolers to also help support them in their journey as cyclists, and being able to see how they can use bike share and also how they can bike safely, as well as our seniors. Often, really making sure that we include our seniors and do real active outreach to include them in our rides and our classes. They really enjoy our e-bikes because, you're able to bike and take longer trips that are a bit less strenuous. So they really found our e-bikes as a great tool for them. So just making sure that you're engaging, all ages as well. And also just thinking beyond the bike. So even though, we're talking about bike share and share micromobility, and, biking is our tool that we're using for access, thinking beyond the bike has really helped us to meet the multitude of needs that the community has. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes biking isn't top of mind. Communities are dealing with things like lack of jobs, lack of resources, and things like that. So for us, thinking beyond the bike and thinking of how the bike can be a tool for access to resources and other things. So with that, we've implemented various programs and initiatives. One called Wheels to Work, which is a free bike safety education and workforce development course where participants come, they participate in a free online course that teaches them about jobs, how to update your resume, interview skills, networking skills, in addition to teaching people about biking and bike share, with the goal of being able to, see how, use biking to get back and forth to those job interviews, or get back and forth to work when you haven't worked for a while and you need an affordable option and reliable option such as bike share. When participants complete the course, they get a 6-month free membership to Indego to, support their job search and other things. But it's a great way to show, how biking can support other resources in the community and, thinking beyond the bike. We also have a similar program called Digital Skills and Bicycle Thrills, which teaches people, in addition to bike safety education, digital literacy and access information. And we also partner with different community rec centers and libraries to install Indego stations at those rec centers and libraries and support education and encouragement classes at those sites. So really just thinking beyond the bike, and also, thinking about in terms of your partnerships. It doesn't have to be an organization that is directly related to bikes. You can build partnerships with other organizations, because at the end of the day, we're all looking to provide resources to, the same group of people, the same communities, the same folks. And so why not combine our resources together to be able to provide support for our riders and our citizens. And the other thing, just to keep in mind that, communities are powerful and they have so many resources and so many great things that they're doing. A lot of times when, planners or people are looking to come into a community and do a project, they feel like, they know what's best. They're the expert, they have the expertise, and we need to come in and, educate others on X, Y, and Z. But that is not the case. Communities are powerful. Communities have been organizing themselves and providing resources from the very little that a lot of them have received. And they make, lemons out of lemonade. And so understanding that communities are powerful, and not trying to come in and try to empower them, or come in and try to, act like what's best, but really coming in understanding that they are the expert about their community. They are the expert when it comes to their neighborhood and what their residents need. Understanding that, and then, as I mentioned before, working together to have a co-creation and co-development process with the community members is the best path forward. And then just last but definitely not least is, don't be afraid. A lot of times when, people are talking about, equity and access, or community engagement with, specific projects, people can tend to be afraid because it's not an easy process. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of mistrust and a lot of mistrust and other things from, just history in general in the state of the world that you have to really work through, to be able to get to a point of trust and relationship building. But don't be afraid to do it, because once you do it, once you build that trust, once you build that relationship with the community, it becomes so much easier. And projects, start to come together so much better because you're able to have, both parties at the table. You have that trust where people can rely. You can rely on the community can rely on you, and you're able to really build a new landscape of how, projects are implemented and how this work is done. So do not be afraid, and really, lean into it and put forth that work in the very beginning, as opposed to trying to put out a project without that community engagement, without that equity and access lens in the beginning, and then it doesn't work, and then you have to start over and do it all again. So, which is the better option? I think implement it from the beginning. So yes, thank you. That is all that I have. Also, there are additional resources at the Better Bike Share Partnership website, as well as the Ride Indego website. Also, thank you.
Thank you, Waffiyyah. I just want to say, recommend people, even if you're not doing a bike share program, if you're doing any kind of new service, especially in communities that have been underserved in the past, I highly recommend you look at the programming that the City of Philadelphia and Indego did. It's just a great model for really engaging the community that you're looking to serve and being, a cooperative partner essentially, so that it better meets their needs. Recommend take a look at that Better Bike Share site and the Indego program as you're planning for other services in the future. Appreciate it. So now we're going to jump to a little closer to home. So Jaymi Wilson, who's a project manager at the City of Rochester, is going to tell us about their approach to micromobility, and take it away, Jaymi.
As soon as I get all my tech to work. There we go. Great. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Jaymi Wilson. I'm a project manager here with the City of Rochester, and I primarily work with destination medical center projects. And I'll talk just a hair about that. But here in Rochester, we have a legislation that occurred in 2016 that is with the state of Minnesota, using both state funding and federal funding, that is essentially geared towards making us a destination medical center, because we are the home of the Mayo Clinic. And so part of what I will talk about today is a little bit on why micromobility is important here in Rochester, what we've done at this point to create some infrastructure to support that micromobility, and then also creating some of the programs to support our community members, in addition to creating that infrastructure. So our version of filling the gaps is a little different than what we just heard, because it is currently less equity focused, but it is really broadly across our entire community. So why is it important here in Rochester? First, I want to just give you a quick highlight on the what our integrated transit approach is. We are really focused right now on moving people and not cars, because Rochester has gone through a pretty amazing growth spurt. Our Mayo Clinic is currently in the process of hiring 20,000 people in 20 years. And so when you start looking at that, what you quickly learn is that there is no way to have that number of cars come into your downtown and not just be disruptive. So right now there's about 35,000 employees, well, in 2015, excuse me, it's about 35,000 employees at Mayo. By 2040, they expect to have about 62,000. And so with that, that was part of why we have this DMC legislation, because it will allow us to use that funding mechanism as a way of helping us grow our infrastructure. And a huge piece of that is transit. And we are working on putting in a rapid transit program and some of that. And so what happens when you do that is you create this rapid transit program, and at each of those sites, we are also looking at having dedicated stations along that route that will support our ability to accommodate bikes, accommodate scooter space, and things like that as we are moving through this corridor. So it is, the micromobility piece comes in as a support to the transit-oriented development and as a support to the rapid transit, instead of it being in any sort of competition. So I want to give that background just because per this slide, this is really about getting people to the places they want to go, making it easy to walk and bike to those spaces, making sure that we can fit into that surrounding, and it's really geared towards any sort of transit other than driving your single occupancy vehicle. So we really have put a lot of effort into working towards that. We're in the process of hiring someone who that will be a good portion of their position, is spending their time looking at that and how we can create better programs to do that. So what infrastructure have we created so far to support our micromobility more specifically, since that's most of what we're talking about with this particular group? The first thing that we've done is we have created some very specific bike infrastructure. So for us, Rochester is a town of about 120,000, and we are growing rapidly. And part of what has happened for us is some of these basic infrastructure things have just not, we haven't been ahead of the game here. So we have just within the last few years put in a number of areas that were just not well connected into our downtown. We've put in some dedicated and protected bike lanes, particularly near the Mayo Clinic campus. We've taken some of the roads that maybe were not quite as heavily traveled and really focused on getting bike lanes on those. We also just last summer put in a dedicated cycle track on a major portion of our north to south thoroughfare. So it's called Broadway, as so many of them are. And the lower picture here is showing where we've got a colored pavement track, and then we've got the brickwork, and then we've got the white sidewalk that people are used to walking on. And that cycle track is really geared towards getting the bikers off of the streets, but also not having them integrated with the pedestrians. We've got a number of other projects that are mentioned here, and one of the most important is also our active transportation master plan. So as we look forward into the future of what's happening in Rochester, what are those things that we want to make sure are that active transportation? And I expect that the program that we just heard about, I'll definitely be taking some notes back from that to our team over there, because I think those are some really great options as we think about how we interact with our community as we're designing this. One of the other important pieces to know about our infrastructure support is that we're creating right now there's plans for one transit village, but we expect that we'll have more that are supporting that rapid transit. And one of the things we want to be really cognizant of while we're doing that is that we're tying these transit villages where there's spots where people can catch other transit mechanisms, that we're making bike parking available, that we're tying into the already existing bike and pedestrian pathways. And this is the layout of, it's a prototype of a layout for the one that will be happening, where we'll have 2,500 stalls worth of parking here, but it's already got all of the orange lines around here are our existing bike and pedestrian path, which it's actually part of a pretty extensive system. So having a spot where people can come and park their bikes, leave them here if they want, or at least be right on this transit system to potentially use the rapid transit, get out to this space, and then bike home from there if they choose, instead of bringing cars even to this space, is a super important piece of how we're looking at that greater rapid transit picture. So then, in addition to creating some of that infrastructure, we're also really focused on creating some programs to support that micromobility. And similar to what we just heard about, we've had different bike sharing programs over time. We started out with the Nice Rides program that Elliott mentioned earlier here in Rochester, and it was in 2019. So that was here before 2019, and then they actually donated the bikes to the City of Rochester. So in 2019, we had a free bike sharing program operated by our library, and they utilized those bikes. And it was multiple organizations and city departments that collaborated to have that done. And just to give a little feel for that, we had just in 2019, there were 1,200 trips taken on this free bike program. And really, we found that people use them for all sorts of reasons. Some of them was just errands. Some of them were just trips for fun, but people were really using them for transportation and work purposes out of this free bike program. Then in 2020, we actually used those same organizations and we set up a bike grant program. And so we took 100 of the orange Nice Ride bikes and we actually gave them away. We still have about an additional 100, but the goal here was we had certain folks who consistently used the bike share program, and our goal was to get bikes in their hands so that they, instead of coming to the library on a regular basis and needing to borrow a bike or check out a bike, which was either a day-long or a week-long process. They would have them for either a day or a week when they would check them out. Instead of having to do that so regularly, actually giving them a bike that allowed them to use it as they needed it, use it for all of those things they were using it for, and really feel that ownership for it. Along with that, part of what we did was make sure that there was just a couple hour class that showed them some of the basics of bike maintenance on this particular model of bike. Additionally, we have had a couple of other shared mobility options here in Rochester. We use Lime out of, well, I guess they're associated with the same group that's in the Twin Cities, are the partners that we have down here, and they bring in bikes and scooters. We just recently signed them on for an additional 2-year contract for this year and next summer. And the first part of that, really working up to that, was creating some ordinances here in Rochester. We didn't have anything previously, so we were in a situation where we could have had companies come in and just drop off scooters, and we wanted to be very deliberate about that. So we've created an ordinance, we've created a process for them to come to town. Lime is the only one that's here right now, and it's not that we wouldn't entertain others being here, but we really we want to make deliberate choices when we go through this process. So at this point, we only have the one. We have about 200 to 300 scooters in the summer and about 50 of the bikes. One of the advantages of partnering with Lime that we found is that they do have a good, solid equity program. So anyone who is on any type of public assistance can also sign up for their equity program, which lowers the cost, lowers the barriers for actually being able to use the scooters that we have. And then we also do still have the free bike program through our local library. We don't have as many bikes as we had. Some of that is due to the pandemic and the fact that we just have a little more difficulty staffing it, but some of it is just that we do have other options now for folks. And just one more thing that we have added for micromobility here in town is we also have Our Car, which is out of Minneapolis, and we had put out an RFP to bring in a car sharing service. Of course, that happened right before the pandemic. And so we only have 2 cars in town currently through this program, but our goal is to start bringing that back up. And really the only support that we are giving that particular program is we give them some free spaces to park. So we support them in that way, but otherwise they are an independent company coming to town. And with that, I will turn it on over to our next speaker.
Thanks, Jaymi. Before we go to the next speaker, if you've got questions, please drop them in the chat. We already have a few good questions that we'll do at the Q&A at the end. Our next speaker is going to be Lisse Regehr, who is the president and CEO of Thrive Allen County in Kansas, and talk about their approach in a smaller rural community in developing bike share. So take it away.
Thank you. And I'm sorry because Teams is a little bit new to me. Can everyone see this? Because I just lost my screen that shows you guys.
Yes, we can see your starting slide. So go for it.
So I am so honored to be here with all of you today because I actually lived in the Twin Cities for a decade. So I consider it my second home before I moved back here to my original home in Southeast Kansas. So it's really awesome for me to be able to be here with you guys virtually today. So my name is Lisse Regehr. I'm the president and CEO of Thrive Allen County. We are a small nonprofit that focuses on health, wellness, and economic development. We are located in Southeast Kansas, which is typically seen as the poorest area of the state. It has the worst health outcomes and the lowest education levels. So we have a lot of barriers that we work with as we try and make progress in creating healthier, more vibrant communities. And so our vision here at Thrive is that Allen County will be the healthiest rural community in the state of Kansas. And I'm going to apologize because I'm getting over a cold and I didn't cough until it was my turn to talk. So I really do apologize if I stumble here. We are 12,500 people spread across 505 square miles. We have a lot of distance we cover in our community, and we are truly rural. We are 2 hours away from any urban center surrounding us. And what we know, as any rural community knows, is that no small town will survive unless people want to live there. So what do our communities want to see? What do our residents want to see? And what will attract other people into our communities to want to live here? And we do community conversations where we go into every town in our community. Once a month, we hit a new town. So throughout the year, we are able to meet with every one of our communities. And through these conversations, one of the things that came up was infrastructure. There's not a lot of places to safely bike or walk. We don't have great sidewalks. At the time, back in 2007, when we were first started, we had no trails either. And so over the past decade, Thrive is in its 15th year now. Over the past decade, though, we've really started to create infrastructure within Allen County, and we have created more than 60 miles of trails and routes during this time. It started with the Southwind, which you see here, and that connects our 2 largest communities, Iola, which is about 5,500 people, and Humboldt, which is about 1,200 people. So those connected those 2 communities. That trail was so beloved and people embraced it so quickly that we looked around and said we need to build more trails. And so then we came up with Lehigh, which is at an old cement quarry. And that trail really became a tourist destination for us. And so as we started to think about our community and those coming into our community, we knew that one of the things lacking was accessibility to bikes. And we had just been able to recruit our first ever bike store into our community because of these trail systems and because of the growing bike culture that was occurring due to the trail systems. And so we wanted to work with that store, 1, to make sure that it was able to maintain its presence, and 2, because of what we knew, people needed access to the trails. And so we started our first ever Allen County bike share. So I love everything that I've heard from the other 2 presenters. I'm so excited about everything they have. We are very bootstrapped. We are your typical rural community that is scrappy, that is going to figure out how we can get this done. We looked around at models like those that were shared earlier. We would have loved to have a model where you can use a credit card and people could check out bikes. We knew that that would not be attainable or sustainable for our community. As I stated before, we are poorer as a population. So we knew, one, that Thrive could not actually afford that bike share station. And two, our community could not afford the costs of checking those bikes out. So what we set up was basically your lending library, your bike library model. And we started with 5 bikes outside of Thrive's office. We are located here on the downtown Iola Square, which we like to give a shout out to the downtown Iola Square. It's supposed to be the largest square west of the Mississippi. So we are located here. What you see are bikes outside of Humboldt, which again, the second largest community in Allen County. So when we started this bike share program, we had an expectation that these bikes would be used mainly for recreation. People would come into town to visit family. They'd want to go explore the trails. They just want to kind of putz around. And that does happen, but the reality was so different. So the first day we opened our bike share, the bikes you see on the left of your screen, those are 3 of our bike share bikes out of the 5 that a family used to bike to our federally qualified health clinic. So they use these bikes to get to the doctor's office. What we found within the first 2 weeks of opening this program was these bikes were used as a safety net. Just like what we heard earlier, they were transportation. So people used them to get to work, people used them to get to the bank, to the grocery store, to the doctor's offices. They were rarely used except on weekends for the tourism aspect. And in fact, one of the pictures you have up in front of you right now is a picture that was taken as we went to go pick up this bike. This is one of our bike share bikes in the middle, literally at the emergency room of our hospital, because one of our regular users at the time, a 52-year-old man, started to exhibit symptoms of a heart attack. He had no other transportation to get to the hospital. His niece said, we need to call the ambulance. He refused to let her call the ambulance because they had no money to pay for the ambulance, and he knew that. So 3 times she made that ask. 3 times he said, no, we can't afford it. And the 3rd time he said, but I have my bike share bike. I'll use that. To which just a huge disclaimer here, please don't use your bike share bike or any bike to get to the ER if you think you're exhibiting symptoms of a heart attack. Call an ambulance. I have to say that. But this man, as is true for so many in our rural communities, did not believe he had any other choice. And he hopped on that bike and he rode it to the ER and he literally wheeled it in with him and said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And can you please call Thrive and let them know that their bike is here? He knew how important that bike was. He knew what it meant to him and he knew what it would mean to someone else. And he wanted to make sure we knew where it was. And so because of this gentleman, Mark, I'm able to say our bikes save lives, and because he is fine. So I always like to share that. He is fully recovered. And in fact, I'm going to close today in just a few minutes with the end of his story, which I think is great. Just a quick map of where our bike share bikes are located. I know this makes not a lot of sense to you guys in Minnesota, but our bikes cover about a 97.5 square mile radius. We now have more than 45 bikes spread out across our county. We really try and be very open and considerate about where we are placing these bikes. So public libraries are an awesome place to put bikes because they already use that checkout system. So we have a couple of libraries throughout our community that utilize them. We also have 2 major industries who utilize our bike share bikes because they knew their employees were struggling to get to work and they wanted to make sure that this was filling a gap in our transportation, our lack of transportation, I should say, within our county. They're at city halls, they're at grocery stores, and our most heavily utilized bike share program is actually at our community college. We have a lot of international students who come in and do not have transportation, and our college is on the north side of our community, and they feel very isolated. And so this bike share program has opened up their world here within our community, allowing them better access to our community and some freedom, just like so many of us experience the first time we get back on our bikes and have that bicycle grin that happens when you remember what it's like to be on a bike again after it's been so long. What we know from our bike share program is that it's a win-win. Our bike share fund program is grant funded. So Thrive is a grant funded organization. We're 95% grant funded. And so this program is funded through a couple of healthcare funding entities within Kansas. We've also started to reach out to KDOT, so Kansas Department of Transportation. They are now looking at also being able to fund some of these bike share models. And so as we were kind of on the forefront of that in our rural communities, we've had many conversations with them. But we like to say this is a sexy program because people just love it. They love to see people on bikes. It's an easy thing to roll out. Typically, we roll them out in 5 bike increments and put them in front of these different entities in our community. We also, obviously, as I shared, we believe bike share can save lives, not just because you can ride it to the ER, which I said you shouldn't do, but also because it's a form of public transportation. And when you don't have public transportation in your community, bikes can be that Band-Aid until you can get to that point where you have that. And the other thing that we always talk about at Thrive, and we believe this with our bike share model as well, is that you need to be able to pivot to where your community needs you to be. So if we know that an industry is suffering because their employees are lacking transportation, they come and talk with us. We're able to put in a bike share there. We had a bike share at a coffee shop. Unfortunately, that coffee shop closed. We were able to pivot, move that bike share to the Iola Public Library, which we just opened that bike share location up 2 weeks ago. And so we're always looking at where's the next place we can move that our community needs us to. And we have quite a few other places we would like to move to. And we also know as well, I didn't really explain how it works, but for our bike share program, you don't pay. You give us a copy of some form of identification. You can get the bike for a 24-hour checkout. If you need it for longer, if you've been a regular user, you can have a longer term checkout. What we know is that these bikes are needed. And so we want to make sure they're available. The community college needs them more than most. And so we're actually working at creating a longer term program there where they have about 15 bikes right now that are just to be checked out daily. But then we want to have a fleet of bikes that students can have for a semester. So they're basically renting a bike for a semester that allows them to utilize that bike. So we're always trying to hear what our community is telling us so that we know how to maneuver within that system and what they need. We were able, after all of the surveys we did with our bike share riders and with our community, we were able to convince our county commissioners that we needed true public transportation. We did not have that. So when we were able to make that transition, which we're so excited about 1.5 years ago, one of the things we did, which this picture does not show, unfortunately, is we made sure we had vehicles that had bike racks on the back of them. So we were not ever missing a piece of the puzzle when it came to still creating that bikeable community and making sure that we don't have any gaps in our public transit system. We also here at Thrive, and I'm just throwing this out here, we help other communities across the nation with what we call Bike in a Box. Now, truly, we do this in Kansas and a little bit in Nebraska because we work with a funder who has us do this. But I want you guys to know if there are any rural communities out there who truly want to deep dive into what we have done, that's free. We want this to happen there, and we will give you whatever expertise and whatever learning lessons that we have that we can share with you. I have a team who has worked specifically on our bike share, and I would love to connect you with them. So I share that because we've opened bike shares across Kansas, Nebraska. We've worked in New York and Tennessee and Oklahoma. And so I just want you to know we fully believe in this model for our rural communities who've got to be scrappy. And we know how important it is to have this kind of program. So I want you to know I'm going over it so quickly. There's so much more information. Please reach out to me so I can connect you to our team, and they would be so excited to talk with you. The only other thing where I'm going to close this loop with Mark, who was our bike share user who ended up in the ER, that I want to address is we started last year an Earn a Bike program. So as our bikes get older, because we started this program in 2017, so we have had to, take the older bikes out of the fleet, bring newer bikes in. One of the things we started to do was with our older bikes, start this program where any of our long-term users or anyone in the community at all can be put on a waiting list, and they just have to go through a maintenance class with either our bike and trails coordinator or one of my board members who is very knowledgeable in bike repair, and they go through this training with them, and that earns them that bike. So it frees up basically one of the bikes in our bike share program, because one of those longtime users is now using that old bike that is now theirs. They get to keep it, and then it brings on a new bike into our fleet, and it is open up for an additional user. Mark, the man in the ER, it was one of our very first Earn a Bike program users. And so I love watching that loop be closed, where he started as one of our first bike share users, used it literally to get him to health or life-saving area, and then was able to go through our Earn a Bike program. And now he has his own bike, so he doesn't even have to come check it out from us. That was a really quick overview, and I really appreciate you guys allowing me to share with you what we've been able to do here in Allen County with our bike share program, and just want to make sure I know it can feel overwhelming in our smaller rural communities to try something new and to implement change. This is completely worth it. It just as the women stated earlier, it's not just about having a bike to ride, it is about a form of transportation, and that is so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisse. As you can see, it's not one size fits all. We've got lots of different options where this can really help fill a need. We are right at time, but I did want to, if folks can stay just a couple of minutes, we did have a few questions, so I want to invite my panel back. And we will jump in. The first question was, how do you overcome challenges of inclement weather? And this is always an issue with Minnesota. So I'm assuming we're talking winter weather, but also rain can be an issue as well. How do you overcome that as, I guess, maybe just a challenge to making the service work for folks? And anyone can jump in.
I would say we don't. It's just a fact of life here. I live in Minnesota. We just know that that's going to be part of the deal. And, for the scooters, we have them out. We actually already have them out here. We've had them for a couple weeks now, and we'll have them until the snow falls. And the bike program, the one through our library is a little shorter than that, just because it becomes unwieldy to figure out on a given day, can we have them out or can we not? But you would be amazed at the people here who, I know multiple people who ride all winter, and it's just part of their deal. We don't do it through either our exchange, like our free bike program, or our Lime bikes. We just, if people are going to ride all winter, it needs to be the right bike, and they need to know their system and all of that. But I don't think that there is really an overcoming that. I think it's more just a persevering through.
Yeah, and that's the same for us. Our system is 24/7, 365 a year. So folks bike throughout the year. Obviously, we have better ridership during the nicer months, kind of from like that March, April to October time of the year. But there's still folks. If you got to get somewhere, you got to get somewhere, and we just work to make sure that if there's like snow or things, that the stations are plowed. Work with the city, try to make sure that the streets and infrastructure is plowed. But yeah, people ride all year here.
Yeah, same here. And we deal with a lot of wind in Kansas as well. So that's also a problem. And I will say, we do have one station at the college that actually has a beautiful kind of enclosed area for the bikes that we are able to keep them in. But all of our other bikes are kept outside in the weather. And that's where you make sure you're buying sturdy bikes that can handle that.
Great. Next question. What size of population base would be a minimum for a typical bike share program? And so it sounds like, we have this continuum. Obviously in large urban areas, the station-based systems really work. Although I will mention Wilmer has a station-based program. It's only 20,000 people in Minnesota. So it is possible to do that on a smaller basis, but that might be a good one for Lisse, since you're working with very small communities. But.
Yeah, I would say it's not so much about the population, it's about the need. I mean, you could have a town of 28 and half of that community doesn't have transportation, and I would say that town needs a bike share program. Our Savenberg library only has 2 bikes there because they're a town of about 68 people, but those 2 bikes are used. So in my mind, it's not about the number in your population, it's about the need within your population. And I would venture to say most communities, no matter how small they are, probably have a need for some form of transportation. And that's how I would respond.
Any other thoughts from our other panelists? Okay. This was, I think there was a little bit of back and forth, but with a question specifically about Rochester, but maybe this could be broader, which is, how do you integrate, how do you integrate with transit, with hubs, maybe even intercity bus services? What kind of thought do you put into that with integrating a bike share system, whether that's station-based or dockless or a bike lending system? Lisse, you talked a little bit about putting bike racks on the transit vehicles, but other thoughts on how we integrate these systems so that, it can, maybe the bikes and scooters help connect people to more services.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say here in Philadelphia, that's something we definitely keep in mind as we're planning out good locations for bike share systems. So we try to have bike share systems near train lines, near certain bus access lines, just in case, you may be waiting for the train, or you may need to get that last mile from hopping off a train or on a bus, or, your bus may be running late, and hey, let me grab a bike share to, make sure that I'm able to get to where I need to get in time. And we also work very closely with our transit agency here, SEPTA. We cross promote our resources and, work in as much alignment and partnership as we can.
I would support that. And also, here we don't actually, the free bike program through the library is part of the city staff that are running that. But otherwise, these are individual companies coming in. And so we actually work with them to identify some of those areas where we can get them more out into the community, because they all started downtown. So we had the funniest conversation with Lime where they said, Rochester is really not an early morning city, because they just saw no ridership before like 10 o'clock in the morning. And they said, we are, but everybody is coming downtown and immediately going to work. So until you get those scooters out into your neighborhoods where people are coming from, they're not going to ride them until like phase 2 of the waking up happens, where it's people who aren't immediately getting up and going into work. Because people who are working downtown, like they have their process for getting downtown, until they know that scooters are part of that process or bikes are part of that process within their neighborhood, that's not going to be their go-to. So I think that it's figuring out how to make that happen. And some of that is figuring out where those key places of equity are, that we can get them out into those neighborhoods. And a lot of those also have public transportation, but this again gives to that last mile, first mile.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a huge part. When I was doing planning for the system in Austin, it's not enough to have that station or that hub at the destination. You have to think about how people are getting there and how they're connecting to that. So I think that's an important part of that. We'll try wrap up here real quickly. We've got one more question, and then we will call it a day. So there's a question about youth and children, that bike share programs tend to be geared towards adults. Any thoughts or things that you guys have been working on? Waffiyyah, you mentioned the programs that you have that are geared for folks younger than 14, but thinking about how bike share can be expanded to other younger populations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as I mentioned, yeah, our bikes are limited to the age of 14, mainly just because of the built and structure of the bike, as well as, just thinking about safety and other things. But even though our age bracket is 14 and up, which is actually one of the lowest, we still do, work with youth as much as we can. Like I mentioned, they're, the future cyclists of tomorrow. So we work with them to teach, bike safety education classes, letting them know the importance of, wearing a helmet, being safe, following the rules of the road. And we also work to kind of do like joint rides. So it may be students and teachers, or kids and parents, or things like that, to try to also kind of build that connectivity towards family biking as much as we can. But yeah, it's really, based on the bike and other things. So why the requirement is still 14.
And so I want to say on Thrive's end, we have not been able to do a lot with the youth. In fact, what we've tried to do instead is find ways to bring free bikes to be given away, and free bike helmets and things like that to promote biking with our youth. I will say just really quickly, Elliott, I did see a question go up about three-wheeled bikes, so trikes basically, and I just wanted to address that. We have two at Thrive to help with mobility issues. So there are a lot of people who cannot ride a two-wheel bike for any number of reasons. And so we provide a couple of trikes at Thrive that people will come in. And in fact, we've had a couple of people come in and use them and then go buy their own because they saw how beneficial it was for them. We also have two pedicabs. So those are basically, they're more prominent in urban areas where you've got someone on the front who can ride the bike, and then basically it's a cab in the back for people to sit in. And that's something that we provide to try and put younger volunteers with some of our older community members, or those who otherwise cannot ride a bike. We would have people come in and say, I really would love to take my spouse to the trails, but she can't walk that distance, and you don't allow golf carts out there. And so our workaround with that was the pedicab. So we've got a couple of pedicabs that are highly utilized by our assisted living facilities, actually, and then a couple of trikes as well. So I just wanted to address that. We do believe that that's an important thing, to be able to have people access across all different mobilities to utilize those platforms.
Yeah, and I would add, there is actually a program, a nonprofit in Minnesota, that does work with communities, that does cargo bikes, again, for folks who have mobility impairments. So if you're interested, reach out to me. I can connect you with that group. One of the challenges I know just with bike share in general, in more of a fleet base, is when you have any unusual bike, how do you get that to the place that needs to be, whether it's a cargo bike or an adaptive bike. So I think kind of your point, anybody who's thinking about that, it requires more thought and maybe a different model than the traditional bike share, but there's definitely a place out there for it. Well, we have gone over time, and I appreciate folks sticking around and adding questions. It looks like Jimmy had to jump off, but wanted to thank our speakers. This was a great conversation. It's near and dear to my heart, and appreciate you guys sharing all of your knowledge with us. With that, we'll come to an end and look for an invite in the coming weeks for our June webinar, and hope to see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.